Yay.
So,
Hey, Mary.
no, it won't stop.
Is Mary on? Oh, Mary's on. Okay, good.
Yeah,
Start.
I got it. All right, so we're recording right now, so just be on your best
It
behavior.
won't stop.
Okay.
Oh boy.
That's all right.
So
We'll just
we are muting. Where is mute? Oh, here's mute. Okay.
Okay, wait a minute. Here's the microphone. Let's see. We cool. I know how to mute now on Skype, so okay. Are you guys there? Can you hear me?
like here.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
We just
good.
muted you because I just wanted to make sure we were still trying to figure this out. So,
Okay, all right, perfect.
all right. So we have 3 of 4 in call. We're recording.
Oh, Liza, I'm Jim Clark. Nice to meet you.
How are you? We're live on our Skype.
Hey, Mary.
Lead here so far. You guys aren't going to be able to see everybody unless we're jockeying
Okay.
the computer. So.
We understand. No problem.
Linda's not going to be here, and Bob, you're in place of Bob, and Rob, I didn't hear from Rob. And Lee and Mary are via Skype. So everyone enjoy this last time together, because this will be the last time we're going to be in this room. And we're going to work out either via Skype or Zoom. So we've got at least a week to work on this to let everybody know how we're going to do this from now on. And the big thing is just making sure we record this so we can put it up for the public to see. But I think after Christmas and the holidays, it's going to get worse as far as the virus numbers go. So this will be a good opportunity to transition to, to everyone being in their own places. Not that we're not doing anything wrong. We're socially distancing, we have our mask on, we've got sanitizer and things like that. It's just out of precaution, we're gonna do this. And we're gonna be at a point, hopefully at the 19th, to start looking at the proposal and pick it apart, add to it and things like that, so we can get it out in January, whether it's 1st of January or towards the end of January. So we're at a good spot to transition to Zoom or Skype, whatever works for us. So again, I appreciate everyone coming to our meeting tonight, and it's good to see all of you. And it'll be nice to see you again on the 19th in a different manner. So, but since our last meeting, we've had some discussions back and forth, and I wanted to introduce Liza to talk about, oh my God, just went right out of my head.
Restorative justice.
Thank you, restorative justice. And maybe we can glean some stuff out from this presentation to add into our proposal, and I'm going to turn that over to you.
Sure. Well, first, I'm going to put some resources up on the table that if anybody wanted to take a picture of them before you leave, they're just additional resources or books you might want to look at or order. Then I have some handouts. So I have one volunteer to help with handouts. Then there's not 10 people touching them. Are your hands clean?
I think so.
We're gonna do one at a time because I know there's some overachievers in the room and who like to skip ahead. So I'll let you know when I'm ready for the next one.
Okay, we ready for the first one?
Not quite yet, but I just want to make sure I'm on a volunteer. So can people on the on Zoom, can you hear me all right? Yes. All
Are
right.
you guys here?
We can hear you. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you great.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Liza Oxendorf, Liza with the Z, Liza like an Ellie, Oxendorf, like strong like an ox. If you're like me, word association helps to remember names. I'm the Director of Employment and Training for Warren County, and I've only been in this position a year, but I have an extensive background working on restorative justice, not only at Syracuse University, but also in Washington, D.C., where I was working at the nation's first urban public boarding school. And I was trained in D.C., my restorative D.C. in about 2015 when I was the Dean of Students, and I was dealing with a lot of code of conduct violations, right? And trying to teach our students how their decisions impact our entire community. So I've been doing restorative justice, but I didn't know there was a name for it till about 2015. And I know some people in here, particularly Amy, are very familiar with restorative justice, but is there anybody else who's familiar? Show of hands. Okay, great. So if you're not familiar, it's really developed from about the 1970s, and Howard Zehr is considered like the grandfather of restorative justice. He's an American criminologist. And, but really there's a lot of different cultures, in many cultures who have done restorative justice practices throughout history. So basically, there's an emphasis on how somebody's actions or decisions have harmed the community. And restorative justice is an opportunity to repair those harms, but thinking about how to include them in the process, the offender and the victim. And normally, our perspectives on justice come from laws, right? Come from how we were raised. Go ahead, pass this around. And maybe the shows we like to watch, right? How we learn about law and crime and consequences. And are there any other places where we get our perceptions of, or ideas or perspectives on justice historically? Anyone? Besides what I've just said, our parents, right? We got punished as kids, except Marcy, she never got in trouble. Jason's handing out the conventional thinking versus restorative thinking list. And for those of you on Zoom, I'll make sure to send these soft copy as well to the team so that you can also see them, but we'll talk about them a little bit. So just look down the list. Conventional thinking versus restorative thinking. And you can probably identify like one of those things that you're like, you feel really passionate about, right? With conventional thinking and how it differs from restorative thinking. So for example, for those of you on Zoom, conventional thinking is focusing on the rules broken. Restorative thinking is focusing on the people who were harmed. Focus on the past versus focus on the future. Focus on the offender versus focus on the community. I'm just gonna let you guys read that real quick. And kind of think about which one you identify with the most.
Yes.
And so a lot of times in our, and not only in our judicial systems, but in how we raise our children, how we teach in schools, we focus on punishment and punitive responses, which leads to a lot of shame, and not a lot of learning, and not a lot of answers for the victim. And so restorative justice is an opportunity for victims to have questions answered, emotions expressed, and for people to come to an understanding. And for many of the law enforcement professionals in the room, you've seen a lot of conflicts, sometimes even physical or violent conflicts. A lot of them come from misunderstandings. And so the restorative process is a way to clear up those misunderstandings as well. One more. Let's see here. So I mentioned how conventionally and historically we punish people for their behaviors and actions. And that really, you know, it's ingrained in our society, but also in our families and our communities. But restorative justice is more about working with everyone involved. So let's say there was a defacement of property incident, right? The person's property would also be, the person whose property was damaged would also be a part of this, right? The victim. Or members of the community who may have been impacted, because crime affects everybody in the community. So, I have a volunteer to read out, sorry you guys, I'm a former educator, so I like to talk like an educator, and I use my cafeteria voice, but do I have a volunteer to read out this quote on the green sheet paper? If not, I'll do it. All right, so this one says, by engaging with young people, and really this process is the same no matter the age of the person. Young person, old person, doesn't matter. By engaging with young people, we can hold them accountable in an active way. Then we are doing things with them. But when we simply hand out punishments, we are doing things to them. Or when we take care of their problems and make no demands, we are doing things for them. When we ignore their behavior, we are not doing anything. So again, and that quote actually is from this book, the Restorative Practices Handbook. This book is a little book, and it's got so much helpful information in it. So that's here if anybody wanted to write that down and take a picture of it. I'm going to keep track of it. So doing things with the offender and the victim. The next sheet is showing kind of a graph of what that looks like when we are focusing more on punitive consequences or controlling behaviors rather than including people. So there's a level of control on the side and then a level of support on the bottom. And this kind of goes with the quote I just gave you. So doing things to the offender is more punitive. That's high control, low support. Not having much control, right? And not having much support, that's more neglectful. And then we all know people who enable behaviors, right? You can probably think in your mind of somebody who enables behaviors because they're offering too much support and not enough control and accountability. And so this is just kind of a continuum to look at when we think about our practices. Any questions so far? I'm trying to fit in a lot of information in 20 minutes.
That's all right, just,
Take my time?
we're good.
Okay.
Don't be rushed by the clock.
No questions so far? Great. Yeah. Thank you, I appreciate it. So the next handout is the compass of shame. So a lot of times, offenders, from their consequences or their judgments, or they feel a lot of shame. And then they might have resentment, they might act out, they might do self-destructive behaviors. And so the next handout is showing the compass of shame. But the one thing I want you to think about is actually the victims feel shame too. And when you see this, you can probably think in your mind about a particular victim that you know who has demonstrated some of these same behaviors of shame. So that's why the restorative process with bringing folks together helps fill the victim's gaps as well in healing and addressing some of these feelings and emotions. So if you think about, I'll just give an example. Even aside from the offender, a victim may also withdraw. A victim may also attack themselves, avoid behaviors. Definitely we know victims who have been so traumatized that then they use drugs, right? And alcohol or whatever to help themselves feel better, self-medicate. So the compass of shame is not just for the offender, but it's also for the victim. And it's interesting to see that so many of the behaviors and the feelings are shared by both parties, and then we don't get the parties together to kind of talk about what happened and we focus on the behavior and the punishment, we don't get the the questions answered, and the people don't get to hear how their actions and decisions affected a person, a family, a community, a neighborhood. And when they come together, it's a process to do that. So what does the restorative process look like? It's not good for everyone. You wouldn't put a victim of rape in the room with their rapist. You would re-traumatize them. There's a process of figuring out who would be a good fit for to be involved in a restorative conference, restorative circle, to address some of these things. So if you decide to move forward with some restorative practices, you would have an expert on facilitating the restorative process. I've worked with school resource officers who are trained in it. When we were doing this at Syracuse, we didn't even call it restorative justice then. But we wanted to make sure that people had healing, but really felt a sense of citizenship, right? How their actions had affected the campus. And so that Office of Judicial Affairs, when I was there 20 years ago, is now called the Office of Student Rights and Responsibilities. That name alone is more restorative, because you think about judicial affairs, that's a judgment that we're placing on a student. But if we're teaching students to be responsible citizens, then the office name is now Office of Student Rights and Responsibilities. I know what you're thinking. 20 years ago, Lyra must have been 10 years old when she was working in I worked in judicial affairs during undergrad and grad school for 6 years. Worked with law enforcement, the city law enforcement, as well as public safety officers on campus, doing investigations, making sure that students had educational sanctions and not just punitive sanctions.
So you train SROs right now?
When I lived in DC, I worked with SROs. I did not train SROs. I trained 3 schools that I worked with, including my staff, 50 staff. I do know that there are some schools, and Amy can probably speak to that, there are some schools in the area that are, dibbling and dabbling in restorative circles as well to address conflicts. So the next sheet just passed out to you, and we don't have too many more handouts. But this one is the restorative question. So no matter whether you're dealing with the offender, the victim, a child, an adult, you're asking them these same questions. So restorative justice really looks the same, whether it's in Colorado or London or Canada, because restorative justice is used in over 70 countries around the world. But this process and using these questions is how it's done. So when I was processing, let's say a fight broke out with teenagers, which happens all the time. If I would meet with them separately, and this is the same process that any one of your professionals who are trained in restorative justice would do. You would meet with the individual separately first. You ask them these questions. What happened? What were you thinking at the time? How did it make you feel? What could we do to fix it? And then you ask them, what would they ask or say to the other person? You're getting them an opportunity to let their emotions out, but you're also starting to prep them to see if they would be successful in meeting with the other party. Because some people may continue to be violent, and you don't want to put yourself in a situation where it's dangerous. But there's a lot of prep work that goes, you don't just bring the victim and the offender in the room from the jump, right? There's a lot of prep work that goes into meeting with the individuals first to see if they're ready. So you're asking them some of these questions, you're figuring out, okay, are both parties willing? Restorative justice is not something that can be really mandated. It could be mandated for somebody to go through the process, but it should not be mandated for them to have to come together. It's voluntary. So people have to be willing to want to participate. A lot of times that guilt and shame makes people want to fix it. But also the victims always have questions that the court system really can't answer for them, right? They have to hear directly from the person, and then it's focused on the person instead of just the behavior. Any questions about the restorative questions or anything else so far?
So these are asked of both parties.
Yes, asked of both parties separately. And then, there's different kinds of circles. There's a proactive circle and there's a responsive or a restorative circle. So a proactive circle, you can also use this in your staff with your organizations. I do this with my staff. In a proactive circle, let's say your squad is planning or preparing for an event or a protest that's coming up. A proactive circle is everybody in the circle talking about what to expect, what the plans are, because if you can predict it, you can plan for it. So that's a proactive circle. Restorative justice is not just about being reactive and responsive. We can be proactive using the same methods. So in a circle, and really the best way to learn is in it. And Amy, you've done restorative circles. Would you agree with that statement? The best way to learn? Yeah, it's in it. So, and we could have done one tonight, but I also feel like with the mask and with the distancing, sometimes it's not as effective right now, but we'll get there. So there's proactive circles if you want to plan ahead and address something. A restorative or a responsive circle is responding to an incident that happened. And this does not just have to be with a victim and offender. You may have staff who had a disagreement. So, and I've used this with staff as well. So everybody's in a circle. The reason we're all sitting in a circle is so that there's no power control, right? It's everybody's equal, and everybody's level, and everybody has the same voice. Everybody gets a chance to share out. Normally there's a talking piece. So particularly with boys, and I've even seen it with men, they express themselves more when they have something in their hands. So I like to use a stress ball or a tennis ball, and it's passed around. And the reason that is used is so that only the person with the talking piece is talking. It's an opportunity to show respect. It's a way to have control of the environment in the room, and everybody has the same rules. I also like to make it fun and have different options for talking pieces in the middle of the floor. So if somebody wanted to exchange one out, they could, right? I might have a Buffalo Bills figurine or something like that. So the talking piece usually is really integral, especially when you're dealing with younger people who may not have the skills or self-discipline to wait their turn to speak. So you start out sometimes you start out with a more simpler question. If we were doing one tonight, I might ask, what is your favorite thing about the holidays? And the reason you start out with a simpler question is so that people start to trust the process, but also we start to get to know each other as people. And we're not just there focusing on the incident first. We're focusing on each other as people first. Does that make sense? So we start out with a lower level question, then you get into the next questions. Why are we here? Let's talk about what happened last weekend or whenever it was. And who would like to go first? And you make it voluntary. You don't force people to talk. They are already agreed to come to this process, and we want to make sure that they're ready when they're ready. And then you go through the restorative questions. And I don't know if you had a chance to watch the video that Marcy forwarded from me, but you'll see on that circle in the background there was some paper, and was a list of things about things that they could do to fix the situation. I think that was a defacement of property incident, right? And so you saw at the bottom of the list was restitution, you saw apologies on there, and those are the things that the group came up with together to address the situation. Accountability is really taking ownership for your actions. Accountability is not necessarily somebody else holding you accountable, right? That's usually how we're taught about it, but accountability is really us taking ownership. So I'm agreed to apologize to Mr. So-and-so. I'm going to do it in writing, or I'm going to do it in person. They would say what they would be willing to do. And then the restitution you saw, they have to pay back, right? They might be paying that through service. They might be paying that. There was destruction of property, and that was the cost of the damage. And a lot of times when kids or adults make those decisions, they don't know, right, the impacts, and then this is how they find out. Any questions so far about the process, the circle process? Okay. And again, You might not get all the answers and you might not resolve it in 1 or 2 or 3 circles. I would say the only con of restorative justice is that it's time consuming. The pros: reduces recidivism, the victims get answers, the offenders feel a little less guilt. They are, less likely to reoffend, like I said. And what else? I would say it builds community and maintains community because they see how their actions have affected the community. It also promotes citizenship. But so yeah, aside from, and then the positive relationships, of course, with the people who are involved and having police officers be a part of that as well. I really miss working with law enforcement. I think you're some of the greatest professionals in our country, and it saddens me to see so much tension, right, in our society. And I've worked with police officers in Washington, D.C., with families, with foster families, and it always breaks the ice so nicely when, let's say, the teenagers I was working with would see the officers in a different light. They would see them as a person instead of as an enforcer, right? And really, and like Amy said, when you're in it is when you really see and learn the experience of it. You can do all this training, we can do lots of training, especially while COVID is going on, but the best training is experiencing a restorative circle. The other thing is that it's important to keep in mind is it's not going to change overnight. I'm not a law enforcement professional. You have to figure out the ways that you want to include it and incorporate it into your systems that already exist. I don't know which things might be laws versus policies. You might have more abilities to change your policies, right? But not your laws. So for example, if an officer sees 2 people fighting, are they required to arrest them? Or can there be some diversion and some mediation and a restorative circle? Some of those things you guys have to kind of figure out, but I am happy to be a resource for how to decide who to bring to the table, whether it's a good case, how to incorporate it into your current practices. You can't be thinking, oh, we tried restorative justice last year, it didn't work. It really should be a 3 to 5 year plan. So you're rolling it out in different parts of your system. You're training different people because there are so many resources for restorative justice. The International Institute for Restorative Practices is in Pennsylvania. So that's not far. They have all kinds of webinars. Massachusetts is doing a lot of restorative justice. On the last handout I have for you, on the last page, there are some additional resources. But on this handout, it's how Colorado police have included restorative justice into their system. So there's examples of how they use it in the judicial system, how they use it with public defenders, and a few different scenarios, and then also some additional resources on the last page. So you'll see in this handout, judicial system, law enforcement, judicial system, prosecuting attorneys, defense attorneys, and then they also have high risk and high impact victim offender dialogue. So this is how across the state of Colorado, they're using restorative justice. These are examples, right? You don't need to reinvent the wheel for here when there's already a lot of law enforcement agencies doing this successfully. So on the last page, on the back, the additional resources I've listed, I just mentioned International Institute for Restorative Practices, the Zare Institute, so that's named after Howard Zare, who's one of the founders of restorative justice. That institute is in Harrisonburg, Virginia. He's still living as a professor at Eastern Mennonite University there. And then Harrisonburg Police in Virginia also use restorative justice. And James Madison University, which is there as well in that small town, they use restorative justice. So there are many resources. And then finally, the last link at the bottom is how it's being used in Massachusetts. That's a lot closer to here than Colorado. So their website is really helpful to see how they have implemented restorative justice practices into their different communities and their practices. I want to make sure I've shared everything I wanted to share. Any questions or thoughts so far? I shared a lot. Marcy?
In terms of young people, where do you think the cutoff should be in terms of age? What age children?
The question Marcy asked, what age group of children does this work with? What cutoff should there be? This works with all children. I know families who use this with their littlest children. Can you imagine siblings who fight? That never happens, right? Using the same process for siblings when they calm down and they're ready to talk. Family dynamics and means. This works for any age, any child who can communicate their feelings, they can do this process. Now, how you support them, right? The words you use, you might break it down to their level a little bit more. But it works for any age. And I've used it for 6th grade through 12th grade. I have used it with foster families who didn't get along with their foster parents. Those skills that my former students used in middle school and high school, they now use in college for conflict resolution. I know Mediation Matters uses some of these techniques as well. So they're a great resource. And I know they provide trainings as well. I just don't know how much restorative justice they include in their process, but I do know that they utilize it.
I have a question. So would this be something that you would say the police department would refer people to a different organization to do it, or are you suggesting that these circles be run within the department?
Great question. Did you guys hear that on Zoom? Okay. So I personally believe it should happen within the police department. Yes, you may partner with some organizations, but I think there are great officers who would love to do this process, especially once they experience it. That's what I would recommend. Let's say you had 10 officers in mind, right? Maybe they're from different units, different ranks, different skills and strengths. If we had them in the circle, we would be able to see who's really passionate about this. Who believes in it? Who's a great communicator? Because those are the people who should lead it in your departments or your teams. The people who are passionate about it, that's going to be more successful. When the people who are really good at communicating, who believe in this system and enjoy being a part of it, those are the ones who should have doing it.
Part of who do you call to the table, once we get the police involved, when the process with the criminal justice system gets involved, won't the DA would have to agree with, or the probation would have to agree, or the judge? How would we address that with the judges?
Yeah, and that's where, your team has to figure out where you can embed this, right? Where is it going to be a local policy versus how are you going to continue to, enforce the state laws that are required of you? That's why I really recommend starting out small with a specific department, or just focusing on training first and then thinking about how to embed it into different areas of the criminal justice system. If you try to do everything all at once, you're gonna fail. I'm just being really honest. When we focus on smaller things, we are more successful because we do them right.
On training, where do you, we got some links to look up at, but are there a local training just specifically for us here?
So I'm gonna be training the Warren County officers. Sheriff LaFar and I are working on that, and then we'll figure out what that looks like after. There are a few other people in the area. I know there's somebody with Council for Prevention that does restorative justice and restorative circles. And I know there are some folks on Mediation Matters who do, training more locally. But it seems like it's still pretty new to this area. And I'm happy to continue to be a support. There are tons of videos, great videos on the circle process, on experiences from police officers. But like I said, the best way to learn it is in it. And it's really not a lot of training. Figuring out the plan, whether you're going to do a 3 to 5 year plan and how to embed it into your current practices, that's going to be more time consuming. But this training, the restorative circle process, is not a lot of training. We could do it in a few days. But I do think the more often you do it, the better you are at it, and the more positive effects you see.
My organization.
So there's a training coming up? Is there a training that's coming up? I think I missed that part.
No, not to my knowledge, there's not one scheduled yet. I know Sheriff LaFar has asked me to work on training his officers. And we have to figure out that schedule and what that looks like. And I'll certainly keep you guys informed as well.
Oh yeah, I would love to be. I'm definitely interested in that. Thank you.
Okay.
The Washington County DA, me and him have been meeting frequently, and we've been discussing restorative justice. He mentioned about that they had a plan there in Washington County, but there wasn't a heavy hand to stick with the plan.
Yep.
So I he said he moved it over to Judge Hobbs in Warren County, but this heavy hand, like, what does that consist of? Like, trying to keep the people in them and keep the clients in the program? Now, what if the victims don't want to come in? Do you continue to work with those individuals within that time frame of within the restorer?
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the challenges were in Washington County, but I do know if you're not consistent with what the plan is and with the training, it's not gonna stick, right? With anything, we have to be consistent and keep moving forward. For the victims, sometimes they just need more time, but usually there's a lot of questions that they want answered, and figuring out who that person is who follows up with the victims and what their needs may be. And the victim and the offender may not be quite on the same timeline, but that's okay, right? That's what I said. The only con that I have seen of this is that it's time consuming. But over time, they feel so much better, and it has so many positive impacts on the community.
How long does the offender have to be in the program? Is it like sentencing towards a judge? Would it be like a sentence, or would it be a mandatory time frame within the program?
So you will see in the handout from how they do it in Colorado, the only thing they mandate is that somebody receives an assessment, right, to see if they're a good person for this process. They can't mandate somebody to participate in being with the victim or the offender, right? It's voluntary. But more often than not, people want a resolution, and just a punishment doesn't help them get a resolution. And every case is certainly different. So it's case by case.
Liza, so when there's, like in Colorado, this has been embedded in their law enforcement for a long time then. What's the success rate of this? Like, I mean, are they seeing these offenders again, or do they stop?
Yeah.
How effective is this tool?
That's in there too. It says reduces recidivism by 90%.
Where's that? Ah, there
Does
it is.
it work?
Does it work? Oh, good start. Right on the front.
Oh, the recidivism rate, 98%?
Does it work? Statistically, at least 90% of participating offenders do everything they say they do to repair the harm they caused. Of those who complete, less than 10% will reoffend the following year. Over 95% of the time, all participants report feeling satisfied or better with their experience in restorative justice.
So at what age does that drop off?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay. All right.
And I think, I really think Massachusetts would be great for you guys to reach out to. And that link on the last page, it shows all the different towns and how they're using it. There's contact information. You know, that's more localized to us. But the reason why I shared with you the Restorative Justice Colorado is because they were really specific about how to embed it into different parts of the criminal justice system. And I wanted to share that with you as you're thinking about what might be feasible here.
Liza, I just want to add locally, so Skidmore College is actually, has been doing restorative justice practices on the college campus for, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years, maybe even longer. If you look on their website, under Dr. Karp was initially who started the whole restorative movement in Skidmore. He's no longer there. But they have an incredible network of restorative justice resources. They also, I don't know if they're currently doing it, but they had some of their RJ students involved with Queensberry schools, doing restorative circles in Queensberry school and restorative justice practices with their staff. So that's, you know, that's right next door, and it's incredibly effective. We do a lot of restorative justice work at the department in different forms. We'd like to do more. And we'd like to do it more with adults, but it is incredibly effective. And it is that one thing where all my probation officer life, I've looked at like what works, what doesn't work. And this is the one thing that if you put the time and effort in, you will see incredible differences in your offender and your victim, and their families and your officers.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy, for that. There's another professor at Skidmore, his last name starts with O as well, and he also is a really good contact for restorative justice. So why do I still care about this? I'm the Director of Employment and Training. Why do I still care about restorative justice? When our career center is open in the Travelers Building, we're still closed to the state, from the state right now, but when we reopen and the state allows us, before we close, at least one person a day comes in our office who has a criminal record and can't get a job. There is state bonding insurance to encourage businesses to hire people who have criminal records, and the businesses still won't do it. And a lot of the offenses are nonviolent. And so then, you know, how are they contributing to our community and our society? And we see a lot of, they can get a dishwashing job, but that's not a livable wage. So then they're more likely to engage in criminal behavior again, or be around other people with substance abuse issues and reoffend. And so I still am very passionate about this work because it still impacts my work. Because I'm charged with getting people jobs. I'm charged with getting people off of unemployment. I'm charged with supporting businesses with getting the employees and the workforce that they need, and training people with the skills that they need to be successful in those jobs. I can't do that if people have criminal records and they won't be hired by the businesses anyways. So that's why I'm still passionate about it, but also because I know it works. So I've done definitely over 100 restorative circles and processes. I would say there was probably only one that wasn't successful. One. And we're talking about, I was working in inner city, Southeast DC for 14 years. And I did restorative justice as a dean. I was dean of students for 2 of those years. I did a lot of restorative practices, a lot of violence, right? There's a lot of violence in the inner city. And it was successful on almost every occasion except maybe once. We also had families who come to the process. There was this whole incident about, you know, stolen property, right? And like these girls were ready to fight, and we had the police officers join us in the conversation so that we could avoid the physical altercations, but also so they could learn from the officers what the impacts would be, right? For theft, for fighting, or assault. And then the families felt like they got more answers, right? They had a better understanding about what was going on in their school, in their community, and then had better relationships with those school resource officers. So I'm passionate about it because I know it works just like Amy does. And if not now, in this moment in history, then when, right? Now is really a better time than any to start making some changes that can be a positive impact on families and communities and maintain positive relationships with law enforcement. I've never been happier. Like, my family's been here since the 1800s, and every time I would visit, I would cry when I left, and finally, I got tired of working in urban education and moved to my peaceful place. And this family is this community is so supportive, right? Anything that's needed, especially right now with the holidays, so many people are doing so many things to support our community, and this is just another way that our community can continue to be great and help our citizens be successful, and reduce crime, reduce recidivism, have people have understanding, get the healing that they need, because a lot of healing comes from these conversations. More than anything, it's healing and understanding that comes from these conversations. And people feel better being citizens here in our community. Any other questions?
I have a comment. I don't have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, and I guess this is mainly to Councilman Clark, Chief, as well as the rest of the committee. Is the restorative justice, is this something the committee, first of all, is willing to commit them, the Glens Falls PD, to actually commit to this for the long term? I think you said it's, roughly a 2 to 5 years.
3 to 5.
With this type of plan and to continue it. Now, is it something that, and I know there's a cost associated with it. So is this something, that we really want to look, long and hard at and commit ourselves to? I think it's excellent. I think it's an excellent.
I do too.
But
I think it's excellent.
So is it something that we really, we willing to commit, I guess, ourselves to over the next 2 to 5 years?
3 to 5, right.
Well, I think it's certainly something that we want to look at and explore, to see how it would fit our department and our community. Certainly not opposed to looking at anything if it can improve our practices and help reduce, conflict in the city and that sort of thing. So certainly I'm willing to look at the resources that we have and see how it fits with our department.
Yeah, we'll look at it as a council. I can't speak for everybody, and Diana can answer as well, but any opportunity to better our community, and if this is a process that does that, then why not? So, but that's me talking, not the council.
I have a question. When the police work with different groups for restorative, what would be the best outside organization? Would it be set up for recovery? Is it NA programs? Is it organizations that provide resources for family and children? Which would be the best groups to? Like my group right now, we have a direct connection with Tony Jordan. We're talking about restorative justice between me and him, saying, well, we'll do it ourselves. If he has clients that he can steer to me, and I can help him do startup work or anything like that. Is that a form of restorative justice?
Absolutely.
It is.
Absolutely.
Okay, because what if there isn't a victim and we just want to work with the client to try to better themselves?
Absolutely. And really, as many community-based organizations as possible should be doing restorative practices. Okay. Because they see the impacts of the people they serve, how it's impacted others, right? And I shared with you, I use restorative practices with my own staff. It can be used in so many ways. In my sister, I have 9 nieces and nephews, 5 siblings, right? There's conflicts. Like, this is, anytime there's an issue, you can use restorative circles and practices, but like I said, you can also do proactive circles to plan ahead for an incident or an event, or let's say there's a reunion that's coming up with a family that could have conflict. You could do a proactive circle to talk about what is that going to look like. Let's prepare for success.
I'm much more familiar with this in schools, like you mentioned, Skidmore, and I think South Glens Falls uses restorative justice too. So I know you mentioned one police department was in Virginia, or where did you say it was?
There's several that are using it.
Is there one that you would tell us to look at?
The Massachusetts one, the link is on the last page.
Is that to the police?
Additional resources at the bottom, that's how Massachusetts police have, used restorative justice in their criminal justice system.
So, Liza, would you say we should start with our SRO? Or is that because you had mentioned something about SROs you've been working on?
Yeah.
Is that a good place to start, or?
It is, but I don't want to step on the toes if there are already people in the schools who are trained on restorative justice. They probably, some of them may have already had these conversations with, you know, whoever the disciplinarian is at the schools.
So I'm just going to elaborate a little bit so you guys know what's actually going on in Warren County with restorative justice right now.
Yes,
okay. So Director Usey, I think in 2015, became a member of the Capital Regional Youth Justice Team. And through that team, there was a big push for restorative justice practices. As you know, Raise the Age came into effect, evidence-based programming, all those sorts of things became very prominent in probation work. We were working with mediation matters, and they do a lot of restorative justice practices, not necessarily restorative justices, particularly to police reform, but for schools, mediation sessions, circles, those sorts of things. We began changing our whole juvenile unit to work with PINS youth in a restorative manner. So all of our school PINS meetings, we do pre-PINS meetings, are held in a restorative circle. Sometimes that's very difficult depending on what the situation is. You know, there are a lot of different components to that meeting, and if the juvenile is ready for the meeting. But we do our best to hold those meetings in a restorative circle with the officer. We also have been working with mediation matters for training, and our entire juvenile unit is trained in restorative practices. Do we always use them every day? No. Should we? Probably. But we try to find that approach in any opportunity we can. Glens Falls School last year, we worked with them on a grant that we received, probation in Washington County, alternative sentencing, and Linda Wright actually worked on that as well. But part of that grant we received in 2018 was left over to use specifically with restorative practices. So we spent the rest of that money in Warren County on training for Glens Falls schools. And they started last year, and they had about a week-long session in person. And then over the summer, they did a week-long section virtually with restorative practices for the schools. And Officer Norton was not involved in that, but he is familiar with what's going on because he works closely with our in-school officer, Adrian Rowell. So he kind of knows the concepts. And then just this week, they had a third session of training, and they're going to go into another session of virtual training for restorative circles. So, I mean, that's one of the schools that right now, and it's not everybody in the school because it's bits and pieces, you know, and people really have to be passionate about it and understand it because it is time consuming, but it also, like Liza said, creates a sense of community, not only for, you know, the offenders, but for everybody that's participating in it.
Amy, like, time consuming in what way? Like, how is it consuming of time? Is it following up? Is it every day just, or is it like, this person isn't ready and it might not be a month until this person is ready? Is that?
It's all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
And the training. And even though the concept, you know, you can train on it, the consistency, like she was saying, they're having repeated circles and trainings because the consistency is what creates the shift in culture. If you just do it once and think that, you know, things are going to change, no. It's actually a shift in the culture for how we communicate with one another. It's really nonviolent communication. And so thank you, Amy, for sharing that about the schools and the history. And I'm sure there's more grant funding available for restorative justice.
We're trying.
Yeah.
We have a grant right now that's a possibility.
Yeah.
At least an application, and But also too, I think a piece of it is that a lot of the people in the community that we work with, as well as our officers, including myself, do not have the best communication skills when they're in a crisis. What I have seen is some of our youth who would much rather scream profanities and not deal with the situation, after repeatedly doing circles with them for conflict, are able to sit down and express themselves in an appropriate manner because they've learned those skills through the restorative circles to be able to communicate. And we're talking people that, 13 years old, they might come to us in the system and leave when they're 17. And I've seen this progressively, even though it's a lot of work and it doesn't happen overnight for sure, work for our kids. And the two kids that I'm thinking of right now that came in very assaultive, aggressive, they've been out of our system for a year and not back. And not because of raising age, because they're 18 now, not because they haven't gotten arrested as juveniles, but knock on wood, that's a year without recidivism on kids that are committing crimes every single year.
Because in addition to learning how to communicate effectively, they're learning self-discipline. And if you have self-discipline, then you're less likely to make those poor decisions as a juvenile. I did bring, if anybody works, Andy, I think I gave you this before, but anybody who works with youth, there's a 40 developmental assets sheet. You can tear off, take one with you actually if you want. So it's created by Search Institute in Minnesota. This is research-based. 40 developmental assets, internal and external. When kids have them, the more they have, and not just kids, I think adults too, the more they have, the less likely they are to get into trouble. So if we can build our community-based organization practices on being asset builders as adults into young people and even adults who need the services to be successful. So an example of an external asset is that they have a community that values youth. An example of an internal asset is that they are an honest person. So, and you can even think about this for yourself, like how many assets did I have and why did I become successful? Because if you have more than 20 out of 40, you're more likely to be successful. We know a lot of the youth that we work with don't get to choose who their family is or what neighborhood they live in, right? And so they might not have a lot of these external and internal assets. So how do we build them up? Because then they're more likely to be successful and make better choices. And all of that is related to how they communicate effectively, how they respond in the circle, and how they feel connected in their community, not just with their schools, but with their police officers and community-based organizations.
I honestly think it's also cost effective. Like that's one thing that we really didn't look at. I mean,
Right.
It's one of the least expensive things you can do as far as change and reform. It does not cost very much except for
Put that as a
training.
pro.
There you go.
Yeah. And, we have a little bit of momentum here with, if we were able to get certain schools, like big schools like Glens Falls, Queensbury involved in it and start getting their youth that are in their schools training in it and utilizing that, and then have officers trained in it and agencies trained in it, we're really going to see it catch fire in a good way because people will recognize that it does work and they'll see the value in it. And I think we have a great resource with you, Liza, to really bring that in. Catherine Chambers does do restorative work through the council. She does do restorative justice sometimes with youth court. There's not a lot in youth court right now. We don't have a lot of young people in it, but she does practice that. So I think we've got some little tiny bits and pieces that can really together change things for our community.
Yeah, I'm meeting with Catherine this Wednesday about everything. And so I agree, it's very cost effective. I've spent way more time than I planned to, but I
No,
hope
it's
it's
great.
helpful.
It was extremely helpful for me. I don't know about everybody else. I'm sure some of this will happen.
What's it?
I'm sure some of it's old hat for you.
Well, no, I mean, it's, I think the big question is how do you fit it into a small police agency? Because, and this happens in all our discussions, we end up talking bigger picture than what our assignment is here. So I think figuring out a way that you could make it work within law enforcement, I think what Liza said, start small is critical because we are expanding into every single area right now in our discussions. And my concern is we're going to just spread out all over, and we do need to focus in on certain things and say, this is what we want to accomplish in such a short time that the governor has given us. This has to be submitted by April 1st in the entire topic of Glens Falls Police and what plan they're going to put forth. But certainly I would think having training on the topic would be a start, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a start?
Well, and I think just to add on to what you're saying is that I think it's reasonable that we can make one of our goals being exploring it. And that the first step is to look and see how these other agencies have fit it into their processes and procedures. So certainly before today's thing, it wasn't, we talked about, different trainings and that sort of thing, but I think that this is something that we can even build upon also. Include that in our wish list of things that we're going to look to do and get more information and see how other agencies do it and see if it's something we can replicate.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Really appreciate your time and filling us in on this. So we're going to jump right on to, we have had, since we went on to ask people to communicate with us through the city's police department's website, we have had some communication. I know Assistant Chief had emailed everyone about that today, so I'm sure you haven't had a chance to look at it. I'll ask the Assistant Chief to highlight certain things if there's anything that's worth highlighting.
One of the questions that was asked is, are we, as a committee, are we going to be looking to, are we interested in having a community survey offered? Something put out to the public with questions. I also did include several agencies have gone that path, and I've attached, I think, 3 or 4 to the email that I sent out with some of the questions that they asked for responses on. And so I don't know if anybody did have a chance to look at any of that stuff and had any thoughts, comments. That might be something that we can revisit, or people can email me if they have any thoughts or questions after they've had a chance to look at it. Generally, the conversations or the questions are basically, how satisfied are you with the agency? Warren County, Washington County, they've both done surveys. They're actually very different surveys. I attached a Cayuga County survey. And there was another survey that I've attached, but I didn't bring it with me because it was a rather lengthy document. But basically, they just asked broad-based, what do you think of your police department? What do you think your police department should be focused on? Have you had positive interactions, negative interactions, that sort of thing? So I didn't know if that was something as a committee, certainly we can explore.
Is there a harm in doing the survey? I don't know what we would glean from that, depending on what we put down in the survey. We might glean some information, I'm not sure. But
I know Washington County got 20 people on their survey that answered throughout the whole Washington County from that Mr. Murphy. There was only 25 people that responded on their survey.
How did they produce the survey?
They put it on the Washington County Sheriff thing and on their website, and then it went out. But I mean, at least they got 25 people. I mean,
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
I don't know what the response rate was for the county. I know the supervisors were asked. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
The supervisors were asked to spread out the survey as well to their constituencies. So I'm assuming they would probably have a better response rate than, have you guys had another meeting?
No, and I don't know their response rate at this point. You know, I think the question is, what are you going to do with the information and when are you going to get it? We've had a lot of discussions. I don't know how many meetings we've had, maybe 5 or 6 meetings, and we've got a lot of topics on the floor. I suppose you could, I mean, there's a lot of ways, a lot of information you could survey. Maybe the survey could, if you wanted one, who would like restorative justice? Well, you know, I don't really know what the goal of the survey is, so again, we'd have to make sure we looked at what was out there. Again, and I hate to raise this, I have a concern of time because we need to get a lot done. But I have no objection to a survey.
Well, and I think just to add on to that, is that even if we decide to do a survey, we don't have to necessarily do anything with the information this go around. I think we've all agreed that we would like this committee to continue to meet after we get the package to the governor, get the proposal to the governor. So if when we meet 6 months down the road, 8 months, whenever we decide we want to meet again, to kind of update the progress on our proposal. We've done the survey in the meantime. We can also, our plan isn't going to be just a one time only. It certainly can be something we can explore as we go through it. If there's an overwhelming response from the public seeking certain things, we can add it and modify our plan or adjust accordingly. So that might be something to do.
I think we got a good list right now that I think we can present, right? I think we got a solid 5, 6 things that is just very substantial that we can, I don't think there's, I think everything's been hashed down to bias. Now, you were talking about us presenting a proposal for some type of budget for our next plan to, once we put everything on paper, when we decide of what we spoke about, I think our next meeting may be talking about proposing a budget like we spoke in the last meeting. I think that's what they were looking for, and then working on our restorative justice plan.
So I started working on our proposal last week too, and it's in such a rough draft, it's not even funny. Just basically all our notes, and I sort of niced it up a lot. So, hopefully at the next meeting, I'll have that document ready for everybody. And in the conclusion section, there will be a budget, a proposed potential budget or cost to what we're looking to do. So that will be part of the conclusion is, you know, this is what we're looking at. There could potentially be a cost because our department is a very small department. To do all these things is just not feasible with the manpower we have right now. So there will be costs to it, and that will be broken down in the proposal. And then I'm going to send it out to everybody, and I need comments, and because I just want to make sure this looks right and it looks good and is what we talked about. So, but right now, I think what was 9 pages. So that's with each page, each area plus.
I have a comment.
So on. Late.
Yes, I'm 100%, you know, I think that in some type of way, we should put it out to the community, not saying we necessarily use their feedback, but at least have it on record, because it's always good when the community feels that they are part of the solution, because it is, you know, it is our Glens Falls Police Department, and they want their voice heard in some type of way. But as Jason said, that's a lot of information, and at some point, definitely by the first of the year, we got to start narrowing this thing down, coming up with the 5, 6 points or whatever, however many we decide that we know that we can do that can be implemented over the next 2 to 3 years, because we do have a lot of information out there. But I do think that the community should be their voice needs to be heard in some type of way. Not necessarily like Jim, I think, said, not necessarily saying that we have to use that information immediately in this upcoming, the draft that we have to have by April 1st, but at least they got a chance to comment. I guess a comment section in there in some type of way. Just people like to think that they are a part of the solution. So yeah, that's just my take on it.
Yeah, and they should be a part of the conversation and the input, because it's not just us here at the table. It is a community. It is the community. It's just not us. So the community, I think, should be heard when even before April. My opinion is before April. I don't know how much you will get, but if it's overwhelming, that's one thing. But I do think that we should not omit what
I
community has to say.
My understanding, this committee is going to be meeting with the community. The question was just, should there be a survey? I think that we're all going to be meeting and getting community input on what's going forward and what this plan is going to be. Maybe, are we all in the same?
Yeah. So that was one of the things, now that we're going to be switching to Zoom or Skype or whatever. How do we get, once we finalize the draft or the proposal, how do we get it out there? And would a survey as part of the proposal be a good thing for the community? I mean, as an opportunity for outreach, because I'm just trying to, we can set up Skype meetings, for, a couple months just to get people's input. We could, I know, Ben Driscoll and I were gonna try to do a Zoom meeting with our ward, and I'm sure Diane and Claudia would be willing to do one as well. So, we can do it that way. We can have a public meeting when we have our council meeting.
Right.
And it would be nice if we could meet face to face, but that's not the reality we're living in right now, so.
So just to restate, and whether it be through a survey or whatever the method, we must as a group have community input.
Absolutely.
I think that's a requirement of the process.
Yeah.
And so certainly that's why I said we have to ask, what are we going to do with the information of a survey? Should the survey focus on all the things that have been discussed so that it's got some focus versus I think some of the initial surveys were very general, like what are your thoughts, just general thoughts. And maybe since there's been some discussion to this point, we could say these are issues that this group sees. Do you agree with these? Or these things you want to see explored, things like that? I don't know what the best approach is, whether it's a survey or meetings or.
Well, that's what I think. If people can't make a meeting, they
Right.
at least can see the proposal and fill out a survey.
There you go.
That's why I think, all right, so maybe we have the feedback in that different form than face to face on a Skype call or Zoom call. And if anyone else has got thoughts without personal contact, I'm all ears. I don't know what else to do other than a mailing, and that would be really expensive process for us.
Right.
Anybody?
Rob, I see you, Yalnız and Rob.
Rob.
I'm good.
Yeah, just my thought about it is that I think the survey is a good idea to incorporate input from a wider audience, and that should happen before the proposal's developed.
I agree, so that we have the community input before we put it from this group. I think it should be from the community also. They should be involved. Because I've heard from people and they want to have their input.
So what are we saying from this whole, all of this information that we, all,
On top of the survey or on top of the proposal or?
Well, I was thinking, well, like Jason was saying, it's a great idea. Have some sort of proposal that have their ideas, and then after that, have what the committee has formed to bring, what we've discussed, but also have their opinion though, above and beyond our discussion.
So you want the survey to go out before we put a proposal out?
I think it should.
Why don't we just, it's very.
And social media is a great way to do it. That's what everyone does.
All right, Diana?
Well, if we just made the survey very simple and we listed the 5 areas that we highlighted and said, what are your thoughts on each candidate? And then a 6th one that said, is there something that we haven't put on here that you think needs attention? And we opened the survey for like a week, like a small amount of time. We close it. We as a committee integrate that into our proposal, and then when we're done, we put the proposal out for public comment, and people can send comments in. I mean, it seems like that's the best way to do it in a time where we can't have a big meeting with a ton of people here.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, we can do that. That's easy.
I think it'd be easy, just to post it somewhere like online, like the other agencies did, and run an article.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people that will respond, and the people that don't,
Right.
For Warren County and Washington County, Mr. LaFar said his survey came back with a few ideas, so did Mr. Murphy did, so.
All right, I do want to say that we are getting obviously some responses, because the email today that the chief sent, we have had two responses, so I think we're not naive to this sense, but the community has been included. We have been so far posting all our notes. We have been doing these things. We just haven't really, as that I'm aware of, had much community response so far that we're aware of.
Well, I think the initial media coverage was
Negative.
difficult, to say the least. And so I think now that, and it wasn't neglectful on our part. It's just this was all new to us, and trying to figure out how we're going to do this process. It took a little time, and as you can see tonight, this has been on the fly since the start almost. So we've been in 3 different meeting places, and now we're each going to be from wherever we're at our next meeting.
Well, to give you guys some encouragement, I've been meeting with Tony Jordan, Jeff Murphy, Jim LaFar, all calls, bringing up our own coalition. After they did their surveys, they started forming the coalitions. I expressed to them that this committee's been ahead of the ball, on the ball, that the way they're forming to their stakeholders, the way they're presenting this to their stakeholders, that they should use us as a model. Though how crazy and it might seem that we've been, but I think we've been forming this exact, to the T. Honestly, we came up with a bunch of problems. We just tried to come up with a bunch of new problems, new solutions. And no one I can say right now. I met with Mr. LaFar last Tuesday, and he was very open-minded. We're forming our own coalition with Mutual Aid, the Democratic Party of Warren County, and certain other people that work with Mr. York, and we sent out an email for Zoom so we can stay on track. And what I'm helping out is telling them how we're forming our committee, so they see a blueprint of how we're doing it. Because they're asking, well, how's it going in Guns Falls? And I'm like, well, it's this, and this, and this. And then I'm just seeing us, they're shadowing what we're doing. But the stakeholders meeting with them, they're having us form our own coalition, like this committee, and Mr. LaFleur is coming to us. He did see his survey, brought back some questions from the public, but he, like us, like to hear our coalition groups and start working on the process. And after April 1st, they're willing to continue working with the public as well. So, but we're on, I mean, Washington County hasn't informed the committee yet, but they're trying to build a coalition right now. Also, Hudson Falls had one meeting, and they're trying to do it over Zoom, and that hasn't happened yet, and we're already in the end of December. So we're doing pretty. I think this is an excellent committee again, and I think like everyone should just look into how we're doing it, and then if any reform committees come up again, that this is the way they should go about it. Because I think everyone had their hands up in the air when the governor handed this out to everyone. You know, everybody, we all started like this, and now I feel like we're the leaders of the group with the committee meetings.
So, thank you for that, I appreciate that. I think, so tell me if this is realistic. Do you think someone could put a survey?
That's what I would have to ask Megan, because
No,
all I can do is
I'm working on the plan right now.
Survey Monkey, like I know, and Rob, you may be able to comment, because I know Linda utilized Survey Monkey for some mental health surveys that she did. So I know that that's a pretty good resource for getting, and I don't know how much it costs. I don't think it's very expensive to do it. But it kind of organizes everything together in a short survey like you were talking about, precise, and then basically just gives you a link, and then you send that link to whoever you want to send it to. So Survey Monkey can be a thing. And I don't know, Rob, are you familiar what Linda did with that?
Yeah, somewhat. I think the link could be on the website, and Linda Wright's a little more familiar with it, so we can talk, and I'm sure she'd be willing to help out with it.
I have a Survey Monkey account. I could create it and put it on the police page of the city's website and notifications.
Yeah.
I use it for the research that I do.
That's awesome, thank you, Diane.
I mean, it's gonna be like 6 questions.
Yeah.
My other question is, do you want me to ask people if they're city residents or not? Do you think that matters?
I think so.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you. So do you think it's realistic that we could have the deadline as like the 16th and pull the information for our 17th meeting? Do you think that's realistic, Diana, or is that?
January?
No.
No.
Next meeting on the 17th.
Probably for January.
We need to survey out for a week.
Yeah, I think I can have it done so that it can go out on the 9th. It's like I said, it's very brief, and then that would give us a week. You know, it doesn't give us a ton of time to analyze the data before our meeting, but at least we could.
But at least we have it for the meeting, and if there was something that popped out of it, we can then discuss it at our meeting. Does that sound like a reasonable?
It's a start, right? It gets the ball rolling, and if people continue to answer a survey beyond the date, I don't know if that's even possible. I guess we would see what they said.
I think we could close the survey so that they can't get back here, or we could take the links down, you know. Just because we want to close it so that we can then consider all the data, right? Not miss things.
Yeah, if there's something that comes out of the survey that we didn't think of, or out of one of the topic areas that someone brought up that might be a benefit to putting in the proposal, I mean, that would be the goal.
Right.
That
way we can discuss it as a group.
So in order to get public attention to this survey,
But, yeah, that's a right question.
newspapers in town, people hate one, love the other, vice versa. So we have to be able to get both those papers to put out the message that there is a survey. Maybe even people still listen to the radio here.
We could send a press release, probably.
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, there, I mean, you know, well, let's see what the media does with that information.
And your Facebook page.
Yeah, we, you know,
And the city has a notification system, and so if city residents sign up for it, anytime we post something, they automatically get an email. And we also put those on the city Instagram page and on the city website. So that's another means to get it out there.
Good.
Right.
awesome. It's almost 7:30, so we can, is there anybody have anything to say? If not, we'll close the meeting and then be on the 17th.
And we're going to have a Zoom meeting on the 17th?
So I'm not sure if we're gonna, what would be easier?
This was Skype, we already have it on our, and the reason we have it on one of our computers is for right, but whatever.
My final thing is that this Skype is works a whole lot better.
Does this work for you guys?
Skype works great.
This Skype works a whole lot better than Zoom.
It's a great.
Yeah, more control of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
all right.
So we'll just send out the link prior to it, and everybody just log in
And we can post it on the website, so.
Okay. That'd be great.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Everybody have a good night now.
Have a good night.
Thank you.